Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us, and we're going to get going. So, hello and welcome to the Lit Club here at New American Economy. My name is Sam Schwartz, and I run our Lit Club. For those of you who have joined one of our past events, welcome back. And for those of you who are new to the Lit Club, thank you for taking the time to join us, and we hope we'll earn your presence at future NAE events. A special welcome and thank you to our partners at Fable, a new app changing the way we read and interact with each other and authors. Please check out Fable, as we at NAE have both a reading club and a folio of books. Now for tonight's event, we're excited to bring you a conversation between two incredible immigrant authors. Sigh Tran is the author of this month's Lit Club special selection. Her book, House of Sticks, out earlier this month, received rave reviews, including one from NPR. Phuc Tran is the critically acclaimed author of the 2020 debut, Sigh Gone, which was found on many best of 2020 lists, including my own. I personally can't recommend these books enough. So now let's get going. You can find me in the Zoom chat, sharing articles and links throughout the conversation. There will also be a Q&A portion at the end of the discussion, so please submit any questions you may have using the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. And now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce Sigh Tran, reading an excerpt from her incredible memoir, House of Sticks.
Hi, everyone. As Sam said, I'll be reading an excerpt from my memoir. There's a strange man in our living room. I have not seen him before, but my father has invited him in and my mother is making him tea. My brothers are in school and I sit on the floor at home, playing with a cockroach that has unwittingly crossed my path, making walls with my hands. It's really easy, the man says. Someone delivers the materials to you every weekend. You put them together, sew them into whatever the boss wants, and you exchange your finished products for the next set of materials the following weekend. Easy. He is young and has an accent when he speaks Vietnamese, the kind my brothers and I will develop when our tongues cool like iron into Western phonemic casts. He looks around at our apartment. It makes me anxious. They are seated in the living room at a table my father has just found on the street. The chairs they sit on are splintered school chairs salvaged from the schoolyard across the street. And we get paid enough? My father asks nervously. Thin lines have appeared on his honey brown face in just a few months. His eyes are wide and watery. It has been 2 months since any of us has had a full meal. But thanks to my mother's shopping with Mrs. Six, we have discovered the wonder of canned sardines. I love canned sardines, a break from the rice with soy sauce. Oh yeah, definitely. There's so much money in this business. All the Vietnamese are doing it in the area. I'm not allowed to make eye contact with adults. It is rude. So I watch their interaction out of the corner of my eye. The man is tall, is dressed in a fancy suit and tie with shiny shoes, and has a crew cut. My mother's hands shake as she pours tea for him. He has a loud voice. He tells my parents that they will be given a Mitsubishi sewing machine to assist them in the work. Brand name stuff, high end. His eyes dart quickly around the apartment. He rarely looks at my parents as he speaks, but he promises that he will bring them success and provide them with a solid livelihood. My father stands up and shakes the young man's hand vigorously, bowing to him at the same time. There are holes in my father's worn t-shirt. His trousers do not reach his ankles, and he is barefoot. They look different, my father and this man. No problem, the young man says, glad to help. He glances over at me and furrows his brow a little before catching himself and waving goodbye. I look down at my pet cockroach and realize that I have accidentally killed it. Thank you.
Thanks, Sigh. I remembered to unmute myself today, so we're off to a great start. Also, let's have a moment of silence for poor Rochi. Do you want to start by just telling us a little bit about your journey to writing this book? Because I think it's, I know it already, so but I love hearing it. And I think our audience, if they haven't heard it, they will love it. And if they have heard it, they will love it again.
Okay. Well, let's see, where do I start? I was studying fiction at Columbia. And at some point, I realized that I didn't have enough credits to graduate by the following year. I guess my dean forgot to mention that to me. So she suggested that I take an outside course. And so I found one at NYU called Writers in New York. And I applied to the fiction department of that program. And on my first day, I didn't quite jive with the professor. And I did something that was so uncharacteristic of me. I wrote to the program director and told a little white lie. I said that I accidentally bubbled in fiction when I meant nonfiction, um, just because I was paying for the course, so I really wanted to get the most out of the experience. And she said, "Sure, there's space in nonfiction, so if you want, you could switch over." And that's where I met Saeed Serafizadeh, who is an incredible memoirist. He wrote When Skateboards Will Be Free and Brief Encounters with the Enemy. And he was just such an amazing professor, so engaging. And it was clear that he loved the craft and was passionate about it. So I did something else that was uncharacteristic of me, which is I sent him some of my pages that I was working on at the time in another nonfiction workshop of the same program. And I asked if he could read those pages and give me some feedback. And he said, "No, I'm sorry, I can't. I don't have any time. And also, this is a seminar, it's not a workshop. So I'm very sorry. But why don't you come to my office hours and we could chat about your goals as a writer?" So I said, "Okay, sure, why not?" And I told him that I was working on a novel that was loosely based on my life, or not even working on a novel, that I was hoping to write a novel one day. Didn't know when that would be, but that it would be loosely based on my life. And he said, "Why? What's so interesting about your life?" Very blunt. And so I told him a little bit about my experiences as a refugee and as a nail salon technician. And he really loved my story, and he said, "You should totally write this. Sometimes I get manicures and I often wonder about the lives of these nail salon technicians." And that was it. And I thought it was a great meeting, and I went home. I was really happy. And I don't know if it was the next day or the next week, but his agent emailed me and said, "Dear Lee, Saeed forwarded us your pages. We think you write very well, and we would love to meet you." And that's how I met Sarah, who is also your agent, Phuc, and she's the best agent ever. And yeah, she said to me on our first meeting, "Lee, this has to be a memoir, not a novel, because it's a true story already, and it would mean so much to so many people if you wrote it as truth and not as fiction." I hope that answers your question.
Yes, I love it. I love it. I want to put that first professor on blast, but I won't.
Oh,
Also, like what a great story, just as a sort of a blueprint for people to be bold, right? Because what's the worst that could have happened, right? Like someone says no, right? But I think, right? I mean, you were really rewarded for your audacity, I think.
yeah.
So yeah, so all you young people out there, you can be like Lee Tran. All right, let's that's so great. Thank you for recapping that. I love it. So I guess my first question for you, Lee, is really about I guess it's going off of Professor Saeed's question, and it's a little bit more about this idea of what your hopes were as you were writing your memoir. In the context of refugee and immigrant narratives. Like if you thought about it in those terms and what you thought you would contribute, or like a perspective, or a voice that you felt might have been missing from that array.
Absolutely. I think, ultimately my hope was simply to humanize the experience of being a refugee and an immigrant in a nuanced way. I think so much is being said about the immigrant and refugee experience these days, especially. And I wanted to offer my own complicated narrative. And, Asian Americans, and I imagine many different cultural ethnicities in general, have always had a challenging time being dismissed or lumped together into a monolithic mass. So not only did I hope that my story would illuminate the varied and complex aspects of the immigrant experience, but I also wanted to connect to those who, despite never having gone through these experiences, can still relate to the individual themes that are pervasive to our collective experiences and can see themselves in my story. And I guess just realize that we're all human with the same flaws and the same desires to feel safe and loved.
Yeah, for sure. So I have a friend who's this is a little bit off topic. I didn't run this by you earlier, but I have a friend who is Colombian with an O, not from Colombia. And she said that she doesn't identify as Latinx or Latin, that she specifically identifies as Colombian because to her, it seems that even within Colombian culture, there's like such a wide array of cultures and experiences and perspectives. And I'm curious about when and if you sort of discovered the Asian American umbrella, or if you sort of feel like you're sort of like Viet American first and then maybe like Asian American later, or like is it like a hat that like you take off and put on, or a perspective that you take off and put on sort of as it's useful?
Yeah, I think the first time I felt like I was lumped into something was very early on, I think in either elementary or middle school, when people asked me where I was from, and I would say Vietnam, and they would say something like, "Oh, you mean like the Vietnam War?" And I always thought it was so strange that an entire culture could be synonymous to a war. And then later on, people would call me Chinese. And while they weren't wrong, I felt like it was erasing another part of my identity, the Vietnamese part, and also the American part.
You should explain to people if they haven't read your book that about that distinction.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm actually 7/8 Chinese. So my grandparents, both sets of grandparents, were born in China and they immigrated to Vietnam. And so my parents grew up speaking Teochew, which is a Chinese dialect. And what's funny is that they were ostracized in many ways within Vietnam and their Vietnamese neighborhoods. And the Vietnamese would make fun of them for speaking Chinese, and then we come to America, and then we're made fun of for speaking Vietnamese. And so there are all these different layers of alienation. Um, and for a very long time, I felt like I didn't belong anywhere in any sort of subgroup, even in my gender. It was just very isolating. But I think it's given me a very unique perspective in terms of belonging to this earth and belonging to myself in a way that I have found throughout my journey to be empowering.
Yeah, that's so bonkers to me to think about your parent, like, not to say that all Viet people are a monolith, but it's they're very there's like very strong tribalism, right, in Viet culture. My mother is from the north and my father's from the south, and so my father will actually code switch and speak sort of like the Hanoi dialect when he's speaking to her parents or her, and then my uncles like just ruthlessly make fun of him like when he code switches, like he's just doing it out of politeness and deference, right? And they're just like, oh, look at you, Mr. I'm going to speak a Hanoi dialect now. It's just like it's ruthless, and they're like, pick a lane, pick a lane. Okay, so I'm so
And if you don't.
yeah, it's really loose. I mean, that's like classic like Viet family, right? It's just like they're just gonna beat you up no matter what. So I'm so curious. So in your book, you talk about an incredible teacher named Mrs. Liu. Am I saying that right?
Yeah.
And so I guess I'm assuming from her name that she is / was Asian. And I'm so curious about. So one of the things that I sort of that struck me was that I was like, oh man, she had like this like Asian female role model, and like I've never had a teacher who was not white. So all of my teachers ever from elementary school through graduate school have always been like white people. It's not a judgment, it's just an observation. And so I was like, man, what is like, and I guess I'm so curious about that aspect of as a young person, seeing this like Asian woman who's your English teacher, like teaching you English, and here you are now, right? Like ironically or not, or writing a book and writing a memoir and being this, sort of like the dream come true for like English teachers, right? She's like, my protege, she wrote a book. So I guess I'm so curious if you could say more about if you saw her in that way, like if you saw her sort of Asianness as well as her being sort of like a person who was teaching English and a role model and whatever you want to riff on about the
Yeah.
mighty Mrs. Liu.
Well, I think, going back to our previous discussion about, Asians being lumped together in this monolithic mass, I I guess, I mean, it's part of my upbringing, part of that feeling of alienation and never belonging, but also part of my not being able to see. And so, for those who haven't read the book, I couldn't see from the age of 8 to 18. Couldn't see very well. I suffered from myopia, and my father didn't allow me to wear glasses. And so that meant that as my eyesight deteriorated, I really couldn't see faces anymore. And while I knew that Miss Liu is Asian, I it never occurred to me to identify with her in that sense. What I only saw her as this incredible English teacher, and beyond an English teacher, she was just a really kind and caring mentor to me.
Very
Uh,
fuzzy English teacher,
yeah,
like
exactly.
a blurry.
Yes, exactly. And she was just an incredibly powerful woman, and I just am so grateful to all the lessons that she's taught me, not just in English, but in life in general. And so I think part of my treatment of her in the text, I didn't call attention to her Asianness because, well, first, based on her last name, I figured people would understand, but also I just wanted to celebrate her as, an incredible teacher.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. So, related to, so it's like a sort of a huge plot point. It's not a spoiler by any means um, that your father just kept refusing to allow you to get corrective eyewear. And so I guess I want to talk a little bit about that relationship. And through the book I've read, in the second time I read your book, like I think I was really thinking and zeroing in on the tension between you and your parents, and the tension really specifically between, to me, what felt like sort of like a budding feminism in you, if you want to call it that, or this idea of like you're valuing your own worth and your own womanhood, and how your parents disregarded that, if I can sort of be as so blunt. And so I'm curious about how you've made sense of that. So like the tension between valuing yourself and, we don't have to call it feminism, and the things that made you and your parents not value yourself. Like so I guess I'm wondering about how that's resolved itself or in your life.
Yeah, I think I was invalidated in many ways throughout my life, and much of which was tied to my gender and the roles assigned to my gender. And it was very difficult growing up in two vastly different cultures. One that was in its third and fourth wave of feminism, and another that was still very rigid in its perception and treatment of women. And please don't get me wrong. I think America still has a lot of work to do in that department. With like gender pay gap and all of that. But I think being exposed to powerful women in media, and and eventually being able to step into my own power allowed me to leave behind many of those antiquated beliefs surrounding my culture. And it wasn't easy, not least of all because I was hoping that my mother and I could do it together. I think, in Vietnamese culture, when when a woman marries a husband, she basically marries the family as well, and she becomes sort of almost like sort of like indentured servitude, and she has to serve that family. And I think that was my mother's fate the second she agreed to marry my father. And growing up and witnessing the abuse and the condescension and just seeing how submissive she was, even though deep down I knew what an incredibly independent woman my mother is and how strong she is. And in fact, she is the cornerstone of our family in many different ways. But you know, there were so many times when I wished that she would just stand up for herself, and I didn't see that. But there came a point in my life when I realized that I had to emancipate myself first. And it didn't mean that I was leaving her behind, but that it was truly the best way to honor her as the incredibly strong individual that she is, and all the strength and courage that she instilled in me.
Yeah, thank you for that. Do you think that how much do you think your parents were able to sort of wrap their brains around that or understand that? Or do you feel like they're sort of in the culture that they're in, meaning that they grew up in and are not really able to see your progress and see your sort of individuation as anything other than sort of like rebellion or a rejection of like sort of Viet filial piety? You know, and maybe also, have you been able to express, you know, even a little bit of that, your frustration or anger? I mean, I think there are lots of places in the book where you're feeling very angry at your parents. I'm feeling very angry at your parents, you know, when they won't let you, you know, get glasses and things like that. So have you been able to, have you been able to talk to them about that? And do you think that they understand your journey now?
Yeah, I mean, I think in the beginning it was definitely hard. I think one of the reasons that I could never name my feelings, at least in the first half of the book, was because of this erasure that happened very early on in terms of, you know, filial piety and never being allowed to be angry at one's parents because of all the sacrifices that they make for us and coming over to America. You know, all of that sort of shame and guilt that's wrapped up in those feelings, and not being allowed to talk back even. And you know, I had this psychiatrist that I speak about in the book, and despite my very complicated relationship with this psychiatrist, I think he did ultimately help me reach the conclusion that it was okay to be angry. And I understandably had much to be angry about. And it's, you know, such a powerful feeling, to know that it's okay to be angry at my parents, and that it didn't mean that I didn't love them, and it didn't mean that I didn't appreciate their sacrifices, but that they failed me in ways that many people couldn't imagine, and I was allowed to be angry. And so I think, you know, there's a section in which I don't know, I feel like I've already spoiled a lot of the book.
Okay, go for it. Go for it.
Okay.
If they're in the Zoom and they've been with us this long, you might.
Well, there's a section in which, you know, I'm wearing contacts in college to it's like my brother bought me a box of contacts so that I could hide that from my parents. And once I discovered that I could be angry with them, I came home and I popped out the contacts and sort of like in an attempt to get back at them and say, look at what I did. You know, I betrayed you, and I hope that, you know, you feel my betrayal. um, but I think it allowed me to really kind of reconcile all of those feelings, and allowed me to, it set me on the path to forgiveness, being able to express that anger to them. And you know, these days they know this book, you know, they have this book and they've been reading it slowly. And I think it's been really gratifying to see them respect what I've had to say about them, all of the good and the bad. And they know that they're giving me that space to be angry in the text as well.
I just want to point out how amazing it is that you grew up in New York City, right? You know, my cousins grew up also in New York City in the 70s, like right after the sort of Vietnamese diaspora. And the most rebellious thing that you did was like you went home and you're like, ha ha, contact lenses. Like that just blows my mind. Like I think about the crazy dumb stuff that I did. in a small town in Pennsylvania. Yeah, maybe because like it just didn't feel as dangerous, right? I mean, like New York, just when you're little, like I mean, your parents are just like danger is lurking around every corner, and it kind of is, right? Like past any turnstile, around any corner in the subway, like creepy weird stuff may or may not happen. I won't say anymore.
Yeah.
Like not in small town PA, where like I could just be as big of an a-hole as I wanted to be. But anyway, I love the idea that like your rebellion was like
Right.
showing your parents contact lenses.
Yeah.
So I want to talk about your sort of your protector, sort of your biggest champion, besides your teachers and your brothers is Joseph. And I just sort of just want to I want to get the tea, like what's going on, right? Like how is he? How's his son? Are you guys still together? All that stuff. Yeah. So I want the update now.
Yeah, that's so funny. I don't think he's here tonight, but that means I can just tell you all the tea.
All of it. This is a scoop. Anyone who's here on the Zoom, you're gonna get the Joseph drop. The Joseph drop right now.
That's funny. If I haven't like embarrassed him enough by having like entire chapters devoted to him in the book. But no, we are still very much together, and he's doing very well. He's in event production, so he does things like the Met Gala. He sets all that stuff up, and he does the Tony Award. So he loves his work. It's very creative, and Ethan, his son, has grown up to be such a fine young gentleman. I mean, he's the sweetest, kindest kid I know, and I can't believe he's 18. I met him when he was yay high. I mean, he was so little and cute, and on his Game Boy, and now he's got a deep voice, and it's hard for me when he picks up the phone. I'm like, I still can't believe your voice is this deep. And I think we have a really wonderful relationship, and we're actually going to Prague next week, all of us.
Did you say Prague?
Yes, yeah.
Oh my God, that's amazing.
Yeah, we're actually going to visit Long's wife. So Long, who's who's in the book, and he recently married someone who lives in Prague. And
is she Czech or is she American or Viet?
She's actually Czech, although she is learning how to speak Vietnamese, which is wonderful. I think she might speak better Vietnamese than Long even. Just kidding, Long.
Wait, how did he end up meeting like a Czech person?
So they met online. Oh, I'm sorry. I don't know if you know, but in New York, we say online when you're standing in a line.
Okay.
So, because every time I say they met online, they're like, "Oh, you mean like online dating?" No, they met on a line to the Sistine Chapel. They were both backpacking in Europe, and that's how they met. And it's it was a very romantic story, and they fell in love, and yeah.
Amazing. That's so amazing. Well, have a great time. And are you gonna go anywhere else? Are you gonna try and go, like, are you going just to Prague?
No, yeah, we're gonna go to Vienna and Dresden, and it'll be my first time there. I've been to the Czech Republic before, but never in Prague, and I've never been to Vienna or Dresden, so I'm very excited.
That is super exciting. That is amazing. Well, awesome. Is it Joseph and Ethan? Are they both going with you?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. This is a real test of a relationship, right? Like
Oh no, we've traveled before. We've gone to the Dominican Republic, to Mexico, yeah, to Vietnam.
Yeah. Wow. Really? That's amazing.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. This is not a test then. This is just like the cherry on top.
Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. Well, great. I'm gonna so we're gonna do speed round, and then Sam will jump on. So this is speed round is where I just ask you to choose between two things, and I have one like super deep like Viet cut there, so that only you and I will laugh at, and anybody else who's Viet on this call. But then I'll explain it. Okay. All right. So are you ready for speed round? We'll start off easy, and then it'll get weird.
Oh, no.
All right. Ready? Okay. So beer or wine?
Wine.
Paris or Rome?
I've never been to either. I'm gonna say Paris.
Batman or Superman?
Oh, I'm gonna say Batman.
Good choice. Late nights or early mornings?
Late nights, for sure.
Okay, and then here's the Viet supercut. Ready? Pho ba or pho thai?
Oh.
Okay, so while you're thinking, pho ba, really? Okay, so
Pho ba yin, huh?
Yeah, no, not pho ba viếng.
Oh,
Just
just football.
regular pho ba. Yeah.
Okay, Phật Thai.
So for those of you who are not Viet, there's like a bajillion different types of pho, and basically it's like different cuts of meat. And in my family, like the fight is always about whether pho ba, which is like well done brisket, I think, is the cut of meat, or pho thai, which is like rare flank steak, like which is
Oh, yeah.
better. Yeah. So I am a pho thai like all the way, and then it's like, and then I get into a fight with my aunts and uncles about which is better. It's
Although if
very
I really had to choose, I would do Bún Bò Huế.
Oh, I was gonna ask you to choose between pho and hủ tiếu, but
Yeah, Bún Bò Huế is the way to go.
all right, okay, super deep cuts. Okay, I'm gonna bring Sam on, I think, and he's gonna do some audience Q&A if there are any. If
Now
there are
I'm just
none,
hungry, so
yeah.
thank you both. Um, so this first question is, I mean, it's for both of you. If you want to take it first, Lee. So it talks about the word assimilation and how assimilation is a controversial, debated topic within the immigrant community. And just kind of what does that word mean to you, and how do you feel that it came out throughout the book and since even beyond the book, just in your life generally?
Well, I'll let you in on a little secret. So, well, it's not really a secret, but I actually originally meant to structure the book through the steps of a manicure. And so each step would be a set of chapters that were thematically linked to the step itself. So the first chapter was, or the first step was remove old nail polish. And that was all about our attempts to let go of our past in Vietnam once we came to America, and try to just start fresh by removing this old nail polish. And then the second step was actually cut, file, and buffer nails. And those chapters would be all about assimilation to American society and trying to be, uniform, trying to make all the nails uniform, just like we were trying to fit in with American society. And while that structure was very instrumental in allowing me to figure out the major themes and motifs of the memoir, such as assimilation and immigration and identity, the narrative grew beyond that structure, and I began to realize that for me, assimilation is not so much about trying to fit into American society, but that American society encompasses Vietnamese culture and all these different cultures, all these diverse cultures. And so it was both about honoring my own culture and maintaining those traditions and those identities, but also just being open to this new way of life as well.
Did you want to say anything else, Phuc?
Sure. I mean, I think my journey and my book are very explicitly about the assimilation process. I think it is controversial. I mean, I think it's a little bit left over from the 70s and the 80s. I think when my family came here, that was expressly both my family's goal. Like my parents like really wanted us to assimilate and like to blend in as much as we could. I mean, I think like they were told, when they arrived in 1975, like, oh, if you guys just learn English, like everything will be great. Like you can even take on these like new American names. Like everybody in my family, or yeah, just about everyone in my family like took on like an American name, like in the way that some people take on like Starbucks names for their coffee, like, yeah. So like, my mom was like Kim, and like, my grandfather was like Joseph, and I think like there's all this fine print that like, immigrants and refugees don't understand and can't read, don't really, no one tells them about it. But at least the brochure, for America was like, okay, land of the free, home of the brave. Like if you just assimilate, you get to be American like everybody else, and we'll treat you like everyone else. Obviously it doesn't play out that way. But I think my book is specifically about that experience and about sort of the hidden costs to my family and to myself in assimilating to American culture.
Lee, when did you change the format of your book? How far into the process?
Oh my gosh. This is one of the biggest lessons that I learned while writing this book, which is that it's okay to let go. And I was so enamored with this structure because I took me forever to come up with it. And then when I did, I thought, how clever am I to come up with this structure? Not humble at all, clearly. But um, yeah, it became suffocating in a way, this clever structure that I had. Because the narrative ultimately grew, it took on its own life and it grew beyond it. There were just so many times when I kept hitting this wall. I kept coming, making a little bit of progress, but then hitting a wall, and I couldn't figure out what that wall was until I realized, oh, it's the structure. And when I finally let it go, I think I was maybe 5 years into writing this book, maybe four. Yeah, so it was a
Wow.
long time. And then once I was able to let that go, I was able to let go of a lot of things that was really weighing the narrative down.
And then this other question is from me, who I guess I'm a member of the audience. Did you have other titles before you settled on House of Six?
I did. I can't remember. I mean, re-education was one of them. Then it was like Lee, not lie, because people often called me lie. I don't know. Were there any others? I'll have to get back to you. I'll send you a list of I had like this long list of these titles.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I see that
Put it in the
list.
notes app. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. This next question is from someone who has read both of your books, clearly. So, given that one of you was raised in a rural area and one of you in a city, was there anything that struck each of you as being remarkably similar in how your communities treated you growing up?
You want to go first, Lee?
Oh no. But I think just this experience of trying to fit in is something so universal. So when I was reading Sigh Gone, I was like, it was fun. What struck me was how much our stories were similar, despite growing up in these two very different communities, for sure. Um, but the way that we went about finding our identities is very different. And I think, Phuc, as you mentioned before, your rebellious stage meant doing a lot of things, whereas I was very constrained to this sort of claustrophobic space, not just physically, but even metaphorically, with my eyes not being able to see beyond a certain distance.
Yeah, and I think, and also time, I think like I want to also point out for Lori, like it wasn't just like City Mouse, Country Mouse, but I think like our stories are 20-ish years apart. Like, mine takes place in like the late 70s and the early 80s. Well, I mean through the 80s. Yeah, so it was fascinating. Yeah, it's like there's so much, there was so much resonance for me also. Like I actually sort of lost track of the time period, and then you would write about 9/11. I'm like, wait, what year is this again? So in some ways I was really struck by, I had cousins who lived on Staten Island, and I always thought that like New York City was just like, that was where like everything good happened. And like my stupid small town in Pennsylvania was like where everything terrible was. So I think I always, and also my cousins just told me that like my New York City cousins were like, your town sucks. And I was like, yeah, you're totally right. And it sounds like it wasn't that much better for you as a kid in New York City. So, in a weird way, Lee, I was really delighting. I had so much schadenfreude reading your book, and I'm like, oh, she had it bad too. New York City, you're not any better.
Yeah, and I would also say, like in our home life, we both experience a lot of abuse, unfortunately, both at the hands of our fathers, and sort of this strict code of filial piety, and like wanting to please your parents, wanting to be successful in the way that your parents want you to be successful, and the fact that despite our locations, we both experience very similar things.
For sure.
Yeah, thank you both. That kind of leads into the next question, Lee. it feels like, at least from the perspective of someone who read the book and didn't live it, that the worst of it was when you first got over and you all were eating, like rice with sauce, and the six of you were working on the cummerbunds and whatnot. And yet, when you were youngest, it seemed almost like you were the happiest, or you were I don't know if happy is the right word, but you were most joyful. Do you think that came from just kind of this new land, or what do you think kind of stemmed that for you?
I think, when you're a child, the world is so magical to you. Everything is magic. And so you don't have anything to compare destitution to. That's all you know. And so, I mean, what I knew in those moments, despite doing the sweatshop labor and working long hours and, having bruises and cuts on my fingers, all I knew was that I was with my family and that I was loved and that we were together. But it wasn't until later when you start to realize, oh, this isn't what life is supposed to be. Other kids aren't doing what you're doing. And, then you start to witness abuse in many different forms in terms of, racism and just being alienated from certain sections of society in socioeconomic ways. With that knowledge comes sadness, and awareness equals sadness and frustration in many ways.
Yeah, thank you. I guess, yeah, so we have another question from the audience for both of you, which is, the immigrant success story is one so often celebrated and held up, as an example of what's good, of what a good immigrant is. And I've definitely even seen that in some of the coverage and reviews of each of your books. And so I'm wondering, was that a pressure on you growing up, and how do you grapple with it now that you kind of are that example?
Wait, I am? No. No.
Yeah, I'm like, am I?
Lee, do you want to go first? I'll go.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, okay. I like how Phuc is using me to stall so he can think about his answers. Thanks. So yeah, what's funny is that as I'm writing this supposedly immigrant success story, I was still very much I'm living in the same apartment building that I immigrated to back in 1993. So I haven't gone very far in terms of, moving on up in the rungs of society and getting out of this place. And, my ceiling at some point fell down, a part of my ceiling fell down. So here I am trying to write this immigrant success story, although in my mind, that's not what I was calling it. I think people like to put things into categories, and I'm grateful. But that's not what I wanted to write. But it was funny that was happening while I was writing this book, and I was scrambling, thankfully there aren't any roaches. I guess that's
You mean no pets?
Yeah, exactly. Yes, roaches as pets. But I will say that I wanted to write this book to be a voice for people who are struggling, or who have struggled, or who will struggle one day. And I wanted to give them a glimmer of hope, to continue believing in themselves and hoping that they'll eventually be on the other side and find the light within themselves.
That is so uplifting. It's like you're totally yinning my yang. So I really wanted to say, here's what I was gonna say is, like, I feel like that that immigrant success story is just it's the other side of the coin on like the model minority myth, and I think it's really dangerous. And I think it's dangerous because it's tied in this idea of the meritocracy, and that we believe that America is this like place where if you work hard enough, like, you can have the success that was promised in the brochure, right? Regardless of the fine print. I think it's dangerous in so many ways, but I think most dangerous is because then what we're saying is that when we look at people who have not succeeded, and who are struggling and are poor and are encountering so many obstacles, we can also blame them for their struggles. And I think it's just so, I think it's so problematic and so dangerous. Like, I think, you know, there's so much luck that comes into anyone's success. There's so much of a community and incredible mentors that that I need to assign whatever success I've had. You know, I'm standing on the shoulders of giants for sure. And so I think I don't think that there's like I think like the immigrant success story is just any kind of a success story, but I think, you know, there's I think it's just dangerous because I don't ever want to be in a position where I'm looking at people who aren't successful and blaming them for it and not being empathetic, right? And sympathizing with them and trying to understand what are the obstacles that they face. But anyway.
Absolutely. And,
Yeah.
you know, I just want to echo that in terms of, you know, in my own book, I wrote about a lot of sort of the complexities surrounding my parents' story and the trauma that they carried from the war. And to really emphasize the fact that sometimes, no matter how hard you work, I mean, my parents worked so hard, but they just could never rise up out of their circumstances. And I think it was really incredibly important for me to highlight in my message, because as you said, it is dangerous because it creates this false narrative, and people begin to judge others who don't neatly fit into that narrative.
Yeah. Thank you both for that. This is going to be the last question, and I'm going to kind of bring it full circle to the start of your writing process. And so the question is just, was there a story or was there a page or something where you kind of read it back and you were like, oh, wow, like I really have something here. Like this can be more than just one page. Like this can be a full story.
You know, so at one point, all right, I'm just going to go full spoiler, I guess. But
Do it.
Do it.
I drop out of school at some point. I drop out of Hunter College. And I basically pretended to go to school for 2 years. I mean, I literally left home at the same time every day, and it showed my parents this like fake schedule that I made for myself. And I was just really lost until I met this wonderful woman. Her name is Pamela Vandermeulen. And she was at a adolescent health clinic that I was going to, and she heard my story and she encouraged me to go back to school. And I laughed and I said, well, who's going to accept me now with a 2.0 GPA? And she said, just try, you know, you never know what could happen. We're going to get you a job first. And then here are a list of schools that I want you to apply to. One of which was the School of General Studies at Columbia University. And then I really laughed because I thought that an Ivy League college, there's really no way. You must be out of your mind. I said very respectfully. And she again she's one of these people who it's hard to say no to. So she somehow got me to apply, and part of the application process was a personal statement explaining why I was a non-traditional student. And so I wrote basically in 9,000 words the story of my life. It was a mini memoir in a way. And out of the 10 or 11 schools that I applied to, Columbia was the only school to accept me. And when I received the phone call from an admissions officer offering me the seat, she said, you know, we took a look at all of your records, and while your grades were not stellar and your SAT scores weren't stellar either, we accepted you on the strength of your essay. And that was for the first time in my life, I felt so validated, so seen, and I felt that maybe my story was one that was worth telling. So yeah.
I mean, how can we end on a better note than that? I just like, goodbye. This is now Lee's book club.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for joining us, for writing this incredible book. Thank you, Phuc, again for joining us. This
Always.
has been amazing. And yeah, everyone who has not read the book, please go get Phuc's book, Sigh Gone, and Lee's book, House of Six, right now. They've both been on many, many lists, received many good reviews. If you need any more, you can email info@New American Economy, and I'll tell you even more about why they're amazing and you should read them. And yeah, thank you all very much for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thanks, everybody. Stay cool. Drink water.
Thanks, Sam.